This week, Congress released a letter that was to Jeffrey Epstein that was allegedly signed by President Donald Trump back in the early 2000s. Now, there's been a lot of controversy about the signature. Donald Trump vehemently denies that the signature is his. He points out that he is welcoming forensic signature experts to come and evaluate his signature, do comparisons. He points out the fact that some of the signatures that have historically been shown to be Donald Trump, such as the signatures on his executive orders during his first and second presidential terms, do not have the hanging tail that is depicted on the signature that is on the Donald following the second D of the Jeffrey Epstein letter. So forensic experts are going to come in, they're going to evaluate and assess Donald Trump's signature. They're going to assess the signature on the Jeffrey Epstein letter, and Donald Trump and the White House press secretary are alleging that this is going to exonerate Donald Trump and prove that he is innocent. Now, this is all coming together and very interesting because Donald Trump has sued in July 2025 the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal was the first of many news outlets to report on the 50th birthday card that bore an alleged Donald Trump signature that was unearthed in the Jeffrey Epstein estate. The Wall Street Journal reported on this, and Donald Trump is alleging that it defames him, and he has sued for defamation and claiming damages of $10 billion. So we're going to take a look at that lawsuit today. I have it up here on the screen. So I really want to assess these claims. It is very difficult for a public figure such as Donald Trump to recover on a defamation claim. The Wall Street Journal has a right to publish information that is newsworthy, that is truthful, that they believe to be true. There's a lot of protections in reporting news, particularly in regards to public figures. But Donald Trump is alleging that he meets the claims and he meets the elements that are necessary to recover. So we're going to do a deep dive. And I also want to let you know at the outset, friends, that this is Sped Up News. We go live every day talking about the latest news and trending news stories here on our channel, and please hit the subscribe button to support our channel as we get started here and looking at Donald Trump's lawsuit that he filed in July against the Wall Street Journal. So if you look at page 1, it just sets forth the parties: President Donald J. Trump against Dow Jones and Company, the Wall Street Journal. The nature of the action is grounded in facts, shaped by evidence, shaped by experience, and defined by editorial standards that don't waver. The publisher of the Wall Street Journal newspaper proudly proclaims this maxim across the banner of its website, holding itself out to the world as an honest and forthcoming broker of newsworthy material. And yet, Donald Trump is alleging that the defendant's malicious, deliberate, and despicable actions that give rise to this action show plainly that they do not practice what they preach. Ooh, so Donald Trump is starting off with some scathing words for the Wall Street Journal, purporting to use their own slogan against them, which is pretty, editorialized. It's a legal strategy. Sometimes attorneys will do that. I am an attorney myself, and I know that I have certainly been on the other end of attorneys practicing in that way. So on the second page of the complaint here, Donald Trump alleges that on July 17th, 2025, the defendants co-authored and published an article that was largely focused on President Trump that falsely claimed that he had authored, drew, and signed a card to wish the late and utterly disgraced Jeffrey Epstein a happy 50th birthday. To attempt and inextricably link President Trump to Epstein, and the defendants falsely claim that the salacious language of the letter is contained within a hand-drawn naked woman, which was created with a heavy marker. Worse, the defendants falsely represent as fact that President Trump drew the naked woman's breasts and signed his name Donald below her waist, mimicking pubic hair. Perplexingly, however, the letter is a typewritten note styled as an imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein, written in the third person. Indeed, the defendants provide a series of quotes from the non-existent letter, claiming that the letter was written in third person, beginning with a voiceover, interluding a conversation followed by a purported dialogue between President Trump and Epstein as if they were characters in a play. So that's something that did strike me when I was looking at this letter, is that it has like the outline drawn of this naked woman, very curvaceous woman. It does purport to have like things that say Jeffrey Donald, like it has text written as if they were characters in like a play, as if this was a script, and it references the two sharing a wonderful secret. And it's really, I thought it was weird that it was written in third person. Like, does that necessarily seem something that Donald Trump would do? You know, does he have the time to sit there and do that? Is he that creative and innovative to think to do that? I don't know. And, you know, as we've been seeing that he's been pretty much like, bring on the forensic signature experts. He's open to that. He wants them to compare his signature to the Donald signature that is on this 50th birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein. And he says, this is going to prove that Donald Trump says this is going to prove that he is innocent and that he did not sign this card. So a lot of the experts who are examining his signature are pointing out the fact that, number one, this is just a first name. So the card that was sent to Jeffrey Epstein, the letter, the 50th birthday letter, it only has the first name Donald signed, and there's a tail after the second D. And people pointed out that on Donald Trump's signature, on his executive orders for his first and second presidential term, he does not sign Donald with a tail at the end of the second D. However, there have been some alleged signatures of Donald Trump that have been unearthed from the up until the year 2000 and prior to the year 2000 that do purport to have that tail at the end. So it's really hard to tell. And the experts are really going to be important in this defamation case to come in and forensically study and assess the signatures and to look and see the spacing and formation of the letters and analyze whether or not, and they can opine on whether or not this is Donald Trump's actual signature on the Epstein letter. So next, then Donald Trump states that on one hand, the defendants falsely pass off as fact that President Trump in 2003 wrote, drew, and signed this letter. And on the other hand, the defendants failed to attach the letter, failed to attach the alleged drawing, failed to show proof that President Trump authored or signed any such letter, and failed to explain how this purported letter was obtained. The reason for those failures is because no authentic letter or drawing exists. Defendants concocted this story to malign President Trump's character and integrity and to deceptively portray him in a false light. So that's really interesting. They're pointing out the fact that they, the individuals who supposedly unearthed this material in the Jeffrey Epstein estate, they did not attach, this proof that President Trump authored or signed this letter. They didn't attach the letter. There have been allegations over the years that Jeffrey Epstein and President Trump and Donald Trump, were friends in some capacity. But what is the real connection, if any, between these two? Obviously Jeffrey Epstein can't speak to it because, as we know, he killed himself while in prison. He was convicted of sexual trafficking and other heinous crimes. But then Donald Trump's attorneys go on to state, despite the glaring failures in journalistic ethics and standards of accurate reporting, the defendants, at the direction of the co-defendants, published to the world the false, defamatory, and malignant statements authored by the defendants. And that we go on to the next slide, page 3 of the complaint. Donald Trump's attorneys go on to assert Hundreds of millions of people have already viewed the false and defamatory statements published by the defendants. And given the timing of the defendants' article, which shows their malicious intent behind it, the overwhelming financial and reputational harm that's suffered by President Trump will continue to multiply. So then they go through the parties. They talk about the different defendants who are associated with Dow Jones and Company, which owns the Wall Street Journal. And then they talk about jurisdiction and venue. Jurisdiction and venue are just things that are technical terms in the law, where you have to have a certain significant connection with a state or a venue to be able to be called into court in that state. So then on the next page, they talk about a statement of facts, and they then talk about the actual article itself that was published in the Wall Street Journal. Trump's attorneys state that on July 15, 2025, defendant Palazzolo sent an email to the White House press secretary, Caroline Lewitt, advising of Dow Jones' intent to publish an article which discussed a purported letter sent by President Trump to Epstein for Epstein's 50th birthday. That same afternoon, counsel for President Trump sent an email to the defendants advising that the intended article was false and claiming that President Trump authored the purported letter, which he did not, and further warned Dow Jones to cease and desist from publishing, disseminating, or otherwise distributing such information because it was false and defamatory. None of the defendants responded to this email. So that's an interesting fact. So Donald Trump did respond right away, and he did inform the Wall Street Journal of his position that this is false information, this is not factual, and basically telling them, you better cease and desist from publishing this, do not go ahead with publishing it. And then the Wall Street Journal went ahead and published this information in the article. And that can be significant in a legal case, because the Wall Street Journal, in order to prevail on a defamation claim, Donald Trump would have to prove that the Wall Street Journal published this knowing that it was false or with reckless disregard for the truth. So it doesn't have to necessarily be knowledge of outright knowledge of falsity, because sometimes you can't know at the outset whether something is 100% true or 100% false. But if the Wall Street Journal was reckless in its disregard of truth or information, that can also be very problematic during a defamation case. So moving on to the next page, which does have some important details. Donald Trump's lawyers state that on July 17, 2025, the defendants published or caused the publishing of the article that was authored by the defendants, titled Jeffrey Epstein's Friends Sent Him baldy letters for a 50th birthday album. One was from Donald Trump, the article. So that's really interesting. So they definitely did state as fact that this letter was from Donald Trump. And if that is false, then Donald Trump has a claim. He certainly has a meritorious claim if he did not sign that. And I think it's a little interesting that the Wall Street Journal, was so concrete in stating that it was from Donald Trump. If I were them, I would have said that the letter bears a signature that states Donald, and that it could be from President Donald Trump. But remember, the signature was back from the early 2000s. So they did brazenly state and represent that this was a letter from Donald Trump. The article was published in the Wall Street Journal as an exclusive, and Jeffrey sent him baldy letters for a 50th birthday album. And then they actually give a link to the article in this lawsuit. And then it says, however, since publication, defendants have widely disseminated it to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Therein, defendants falsely and maliciously stated that President Trump supposedly authored, drew, and signed a letter wishing Epstein a happy 50th birthday. Defendants elaborated on their false, defamatory, unsubstantiated, and disparaging claims against President Trump by claiming that he drew an outline of a naked woman, drew breasts on her, and signed his name below her waist, mimicking pubic hair. Next, the defendants further maligned President Trump by wrongly and ludicrously contending that inside of the naked woman that he allegedly drew lies a typewritten note styled as an imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein written in the third person. This is the entirety of that, quote, imaginary conversation. Voiceover. There must be more to life than having everything, the note began. So it's purporting to be like two actors in a play, one named Donald, one named Jeffrey. Donald says, yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is. Jeffrey says, nor will I, since I also know what it is. Donald, we have certain things in common, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, yes, we do, come to think of it. And then on the next page, this dialogue continues. And I remember looking at this and thinking this looked very strange, how it was written in the third person. So on the next page, it continues. Donald, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? Jeffrey, as a matter of fact, it was clear to me the last time I saw you. Donald, a pal is a wonderful thing. Happy birthday. And may every day be another wonderful secret. So they're basically drawing the conclusion here that Donald and Epstein had some type of secret connection and shared maybe some wonderful secrets. So despite these unsubstantiated claims, however, the article does not attach the purported letter. It does not identify the purported drawing, nor does it show any proof that President Trump has anything to do with it. And that's an interesting point, how this is all brought up, because that letter is separate from the card that had the alleged signature of Donald Trump on it, that just is a first name, not two names. It doesn't say Donald Trump. It just is signed Donald, right? This would seem to be something that could be easy to forge, especially with a signature that is so commonly known as President Trump's. Donald Trump's signature is publicly available when he signs his presidential executive orders. So anyone, especially someone with knowledge of signature forgery, could certainly forge that signature. It's not beyond the realm of belief. Then the lawsuit goes on to state, tellingly, the article does not explain whether defendants have obtained a copy of the letter, have seen it, have had it described to them, or any other circumstances that would otherwise lend credibility to the article. That is because the supposed letter is a fake, and the defendants knew it when they chose to deliberately defame President Trump. On the one hand, the article states it isn't clear how the letter with Trump's signature was prepared. And yet, on the other hand, the defendants pass off the false, defamatory, disparaging, and inflammatory statements in the article as fact, falsely claiming without substantiation that President Trump is a friend, pal, or family of Epstein. So that's an excellent point that his lawyers are making, where Trump's lawyers are saying that the article itself says it isn't clear how the letter with Trump's signature was prepared. So there's a lot of facts that are missing. There's a lot of things that are not told. And yet the article then draws this connection, where they are drawing this connection between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump as friends and pals. So indeed, the article contains the following false statements that are defamatory per se. Quote, the letter bearing Trump's name, which was reviewed by the Journal, is bawdy like others in the album. It contains several lines of typewritten text framed by the outline of a naked woman, which appears to be hand-drawn with a heavy marker. A pair of small arcs denotes the woman's breasts, and the future president's signature is a squiggly Donald below her waist, mimicking pubic hair. It isn't clear how the letter with Trump's signature was prepared. Inside the outline of the naked woman was a typewritten note styled as an imaginary conversation between Trump and Epstein, written in the third person. So moving on to the next page of the complaint, they do go through and they read Trump's lawyers go through and they state different things in the article that Trump takes issue with and says are false and defamatory. So there was a voiceover referenced. There must be more to life than having everything, the note began. Donald says, yes, there is, but I won't tell you what it is. And we just read through that ourselves on the prior page. The article also contains the following statements that are implicitly defamatory. Jeffrey Epstein's friends sent him bawdy letters for a 50th birthday album. One was from Donald Trump. It was Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday, and Ghislaine Maxwell was preparing a special gift to mark the occasion. She turned to Epstein's family and friends. One of them was Donald Trump. The album had poems, photos, and greetings from business people, academics, Epstein's former girlfriends, and childhood pals, according to the documents reviewed by the journal and people familiar with them. When he turned 50, Epstein was already wealthy from managing the Wexner's fortune and was socializing with Trump. Clients, Clinton, and other powerful people he often entertained at his Manhattan townhouse, Palm Beach, Florida, home and private Caribbean island. So Donald Trump's attorneys are saying, look at all these statements. They're really purporting to draw me as a close personal friend of Jeffrey Epstein. This is very harmful to me because, as we know, Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of a number of heinous crimes, including sexual trafficking. Many people think of him as a monster, one of the worst criminals. So Donald Trump being associated with him would be very defamatory and harmful to his character if this is proven to be the truth. The complaint goes on to state that despite the clear journalistic failures of due diligence and accuracy of the article, at the Dow Jones, at the direction of its director and majority owner Murdoch, and News Corp, at the direction of its CEO Thompson, published the article to hundreds of millions of people. Notably, Murdoch and Thompson authored the publication of the article after Donald Trump put them both on notice that the letter was false and non-existent. The article goes viral. So within hours of its publication, the Wall Street Journal article went viral on television, the internet, social media, and all other modes of communication, which, the Wall Street Journal knew that was going to happen. I mean, they have enough experience to know that this kind of information, this kind of article is going to go viral on social media. So Donald Trump says, look at all these people that this was disseminated to. The article was also widely republished and discussed on the internet's watering hole X.com. So then when we go on to the next article, next page, it has some screenshots here. It says that the Wall Street Journal amplified the engagement of the article by republishing on its X account to all 20,800,000 of its followers. Thus far, it has reached over 6,800,000 unique impressions. To further exacerbate this already caustic situation, the Wall Street Journal also placed the article on the front page of its July 18th, 2025 newspaper. So they're showing about how the Wall Street Journal really pushed this and was really trying to make this salacious viral news. The Lincoln Project, a known anti-Trump organization, republished the article to all 2,800,000 of its followers. As of this writing, it has reached over 229,700 unique impressions. Colin Rugg, a journalist with over 1,800,000 followers on X.com, republished several of the false and defamatory statements contained in the article, as well as powerful denials by President Trump. To date, it has received over 3,500,000 unique impressions. So the article goes on. So the Wall Street Journal and so this complaint by Donald Trump's attorneys goes on to then also state Keith Olbermann, a podcaster with over 900,000 followers on X.com, republished several of the false and defamatory statements contained in the article. To date, it has received over 200,000 unique impressions. So Ken Kipperstein, an independent social media influencer with over 543,000 followers on X.com, republished the headline and several false and defamatory statements from the article. To date, his publication has reached over 1 million unique impressions. So basically, Donald Trump is just going through, his attorneys are just going through and citing numerous examples of how viral this article of the Wall Street Journal went that talked about him in what he says to be a defamatory light. Seth Abramson, a self-described biographer and New York Times best-selling author, republished the Wall Street Journal article in its entirety to his over 829,800 followers on X.com. Thus far, his post has reached over 2,800,000 unique impressions. The following morning, July 18, 2025, defendants continued to amplify the defamatory statements contained in the article, adding over 440,000 unique impressions. So again, Donald Trump's attorneys are screen printing all of this. They're showing how widespread this article was. Indeed, defendants are actively promoting the article by displaying at the center of the Wall Street Journal's landing page on www.wsj.com. Moreover, as of July 18, 2025, the article was the #1 trending topic on X.com. So in addition, multiple media outlets republished, adopted, and endorsed the false, defamatory, disparaging, and inflammatory statements in the article, including but not limited to CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Variety, Politico, People Magazine, The Independent, The Guardian, and Rolling Stone. Wow, so that is a lot of different outlets that republished this article. And Donald Trump is trying to show how viral this went, because damages can be associated with how viral this article went. Although these articles, transmissions, and social media posts and articles are only a fraction of the impressions and engagement that have been generated by the article, the false, defamatory, disparaging, and inflammatory statements contained therein have been seen by hundreds of millions of people. So his attorneys are just laying this all out. And then Donald Trump's attorneys go on to state, all of the above referenced articles, posts, and false statements have resulted in overwhelming financial and reputational damages to Donald Trump, expected to be in the billions of dollars, due to the direct and implicit defamatory statements paraded throughout the article. All conditions precedent to the bringing of this action have occurred, been satisfied, and have otherwise been waived. And he says that as a result of a defendant's wrongful conduct, Donald Trump, his need to protect and enforce his legal rights, he has retained the undersigned attorneys and is required to pay attorneys' fees to prosecute this action. So the first count is for defamation per se, and then defendant published these statements maliciously with knowledge of the falsity of the statements and or with reckless disregard of their truth or falsity. So remember, defamation doesn't necessarily mean that the individual acted with actual knowledge of the falsity of the statements, but if they did act with reckless disregard of the truth, that can also satisfy this element of defamation. And Donald Trump is saying, hey, look, I emailed the Wall Street Journal back, the press secretary for the White House, my representatives emailed the Wall Street Journal back the same afternoon that they contacted us, and we told them that that is not my signature. So Donald Trump is basically, I believe, asserting that the Wall Street Journal acted with reckless disregard of the truth. So then he goes on to state an overwhelming number of people all over the world read the false and defamatory statements contained in the article. The next page of his complaint, his attorneys go on to state that the statements were not privileged. They were published by defendants with actual malice, oppression, and fraud, in that they were aware at the time of the falsity of the publication and thus made said publications in bad faith, out of disdain and ill will directed towards plaintiff, without any regard for the truth. So when they say that the statements were not privileged, they mean that the statements did not enjoy any type of protection. So certain types of statements can be made, such as litigation privilege, when you make certain statements in a legal filing or in a legal proceeding, they're called privileged. Not that they're necessarily confidential, but you enjoy something called a litigation privilege, where you can't be sued for defamation by the adverse party in that litigation. But Trump is saying, no, that wasn't what was happening here. They published these statements to hundreds of millions of people in a news article, and he says he's been damaged by billions of dollars. So then his attorneys go on to say that the defendants possessed information and had access to information that showed their statements were false. Defendants also made statements for which they had no factual basis. And moreover, the statements tend to harm the reputation of Donald Trump, as to lower his professional reputation in the community, or deter third persons from associating or dealing with him, and as such constitute defamation per se. And he says, as a proximate result of the maliciously false and defamatory publication of statements to third parties by the defendants, Donald Trump has been damaged. Because defendants' defamatory statements constitute intentional acts which were made with actual malice towards plaintiff seeks an award for punitive damages. So punitive damages are a specific type of damages that are intended to punish a defendant, and so that they deter them from more bad acts. So then the next count in Donald Trump's complaint is for defamation per quad. So let's look at the different elements that he is alleging for this claim. So Donald Trump is alleging that the defendants published the statements maliciously with knowledge of the falsity of the statements and or with reckless disregard of their truth or falsity. An overwhelming number of people all over the world read the false and defamatory statements contained in the article. The statements were not privileged. They were published by defendants with actual malice, oppression, and fraud, and that they were aware at the time of the falsity of the publication and thus made the statements in bad faith, out of disdain or ill will directed towards Donald Trump without any regard for the truth. Moreover, the statements tend to harm the reputation of plaintiff so as to lower his professional reputation in the community or deter other persons from associating or dealing with him. And as a proximate result of the false and defamatory publication of statements to third parties, Donald Trump alleges that he has been damaged because the defendant's defamatory statements constitute intentional acts which were made with actual malice towards the plaintiff. Donald Trump seeks an award for punitive damages. Donald Trump is the plaintiff in this case. He is the person suing. So that was his second claim. So defamation per se and defamation per quad. And then his attorneys sign off on this complaint. Donald Trump is represented by Alejandro Brito and for Florida, and Ian Michael Corp. And they are counsel for the plaintiff, President Donald J. Trump. They state that he is seeking damages, punitive damages, court costs, and such other relief as the court deems just and proper, not to be less than $10 billion. And he demands a jury trial. He requests a jury trial as to all issues so triable. $10 billion. That is a very, very large amount. And that is why his attorneys took so much meticulous time in this complaint to go through all of the disseminations and all of the influencers and all of the entities that republished the Wall Street Journal's article on X.com. He said there's been hundreds of millions of impressions and views. So I've been greatly damaged and my reputation has been greatly harmed. So friends, thank you so much for viewing this complaint with me and going through all this. This has been really amazing. This is particularly relevant because this week, the House committee has released has released the letter that was signed by a Donald and that is allegedly Donald Trump. They have released a Jeffrey Epstein letter that was supposedly unearthed in the Jeffrey Epstein estate, and Donald Trump is up in arms and he is denying that signature is his. He is saying, call in the forensic experts. I want to clear my name. So friends, thanks so much for watching our live stream tonight. This is Sped Up News. We go live every day on breaking news stories. And please hit the subscribe button because it helps us greatly to be able to grow here on YouTube. Our goal is to grow this young channel with you and to be responsive to your comments and feedback. So let us know if you have any questions or comments or feedback. We would greatly love to incorporate that into the channel as we grow. So thanks so much, friends, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow.